I grew up on horror movies. I probably started watching them at far too young of an age, but I'm going to have to blame my dad for that. But I'll also have to thank my dad because I have some great memories of going to video stores, perusing the shelves, taking down the VHS tapes. Yes, you heard that right. VHS tapes, and judging these movies exclusively on their covers because they had some really cool ones. This love for horror has also extended into my adult life, and I've seen some very disturbing horror films out there. Cannibal Holocaust being the first one that comes to mind. When I watched it way back, I had to actually buy the DVD from the UK because it was banned in the United States. I think you can get it now. Also a film called Martyrs, which is another fan favorite and disgusting in its own way. And finally, a Serbian film, probably the most disturbing horror film I have ever seen. I don't recommend anyone watching that because there are some things you just cannot erase from your mind. So why am I bringing all of this up? Well, because it relates to the genre that this book is in, or rather the subgenre. Gone to See the Riverman by Kristopher Triana is in the subgenre of splatterpunk horror. Meaning horror is in your face, it is gratuitous, there will be gore, there will be gore. And so I want you out there to know that I probably have a higher tolerance for this kind of subject matter than the average person, but if you are a horror kid like me, then you might be right at home. This review is also a request from my friend Britton, who runs the channel Some Okie Dude. I will link his channel down in the description below, as well as his Goodreads review of this book, which he gave a glowing 5 out of 5. Did I agree with him? Did I not? Well, let us find out. There will also be a spoiler talk discussion of this book at the very end of the video, so if you have read this book and want to hear my spoilery thoughts, or if you just want to be spoiled yourself, hang out until then, or check out the chapter description down below. Before we begin with the review, what is the hook? What is Gone to See the Riverman about? A woman named Lori is obsessed with an incarcerated man named Edmund, who asks her to go to a place called Killen and retrieve a key of his and take it to someone known as the Riverman. She takes her disabled sister along for the journey, and she does find that key, which unlocks a nightmare landscape of which she could have never imagined. So what did I think? Well, let us begin with character, and the only character I'm going to focus on is going to be Lori, our protagonist, because that is what this book is about. Her experience, who she is. Well, she's a 40-year-old woman. She doesn't have much going for her. In fact, she has to take care of her older sister who is mentally handicapped. Money is tight, she doesn't have a great job, so you can already see that Triana is trying to paint the picture of an empathetic character, and I believe he succeeds in that regard. However, the big issue with this is the thing that he introduces next, and that is her obsession with this man named Edmund. Why is this poor woman obsessed with a serial killer, you might ask? Well, those reasons kind of are revealed once we learn more about Lori throughout the story, but it really stood out to me because there wasn't even a simple explanation as to why she might be so into this guy. What are some possibilities, you might ask? I don't know, maybe she had a run-in with a killer in her past life, or maybe someone close to her was killed, or maybe it's as simple as she is obsessed with true crime. Something to make all of this make sense right out of the gate. Now, I'm not saying it has to be completely explained, but it would have been a great red herring to make this situation, this setup, feel more realistic. The way we learn about Lori as the book progresses is through flashbacks. Character reveals are tough. I would argue that if you do them, you must lay the foundation. You must lay breadcrumbs for the reader to. At the very end of the book, when the reveal happens, if you decide to go that route, all of it makes sense. Fight Club by Chuck Palahniuk is a fantastic example of this. Or another way, which is kind of presented to us in this novel, is you are revealing the character through flashbacks. So on one hand, we have present Lori. On the other hand, we have past Lori. And these two stories are going to converge at some point, right? They're going to hit a point of revelation, and then we can look back through the story and see the breadcrumbs that Triana laid for us to make all of this make sense. Because just pulling the rug out from under the reader without those breadcrumbs is lazy writing, and that is what we have here. There is no convergence. What we have are two people, past and present, running in parallel throughout the story, and unfortunately, there is no connection whatsoever, and that's my biggest problem with this novel, with Lori as a character, is that even when her motivations, or you could say her past, are revealed, present Lori doesn't feel like she makes sense. She feels exactly like she did at the very beginning of the novel, and so you're still left with, as I mentioned, these two separate people that never come together, never feel like one. It's funny because I looked at a lot of other reviews on this book after I finished it, and nobody brought this up whatsoever. I think the only thing that people didn't like about this book was the excessive gore, or the subject matter. Nobody brought up the fact that the present Laurie and the past Laurie never felt like the same person even when everything was revealed. Maybe they were too caught up with the other elements that Triana was presenting. Either way, I think it's an absolute failure of characterization in this book. Her sister Abby, as I mentioned, goes along for the ride, and she is there to test Laurie to a degree, right? She tests her patience, and we do get to see some frustration bubbling up within Laurie that, who knows, might reveal something about her character, but it really never manifests. She kind of keeps her cool most of the time, or finds her cool. There's also a couple of creepy older dudes she meets while she's going on this journey to meet the River Man. They're kind of more or less what you'd expect. They're not entirely interesting, but they're not entirely boring. They're there to serve the plot, and I was never wondering how they might exist off the page of this book. They never lingered with me. They never stuck with me, like a lot of characters do in a horror novel. And of course, there's Edmund, the killer himself, who we get to meet at the very beginning of the novel and through a couple of letter exchanges throughout the novel, and then also at the very end of the novel. He's more or less what you'd expect, which is totally fine. He's not in the book that much, and he serves his purpose. The problem with Laurie's character, how there is no convergence with the past and present, also works its way into the plot, which I'm going to talk about now. Laurie goes to see Edmund, and she is in competition with these other killer groupies, as you might call them. There's another woman in particular who Edmund is relying upon, but Laurie wants to be the best groupie. That's the only thing I can imagine. So she goes on this quest to get this key in this dilapidated cabin, and she finds the key. And the funny thing there is, it's the same thing about character, where when she retrieves the key, she does it in such a way which felt unrealistic. And I'll get into more about this when I talk about the spoilers, because it's really hard to talk about without spoiling it for you. But just know that it didn't feel like an authentic character reaction. She gets this key, she finds passage across the river, and then she goes to see this quote-unquote Riverman. And that's when the story goes batshit crazy. It turns into some larger-than-life, psychedelic, cosmic horror, I guess, which I love. It was very reminiscent of John Langan's The Fisherman. If you haven't seen my review on that, check the card up in the corner. The difference between this book and The Fisherman, though, is John Langan laid the groundwork. He laid those breadcrumbs, like I keep bringing up. There were no breadcrumbs in this book whatsoever. It absolutely came out of nowhere. It sucker punched you, which is a really terrible thing to do in horror, especially when it's the culmination of the entire story. Normally in horror, the writer or the director is peppering imagery or events leading up to this point. They're asking questions. They're creating a mystery of some kind. They're showing the reader or the viewer that something is just not quite right here. And with the exception of the weird old men she meets along her journey and these dilapidated cabins, there's nothing that indicates what she might find. And I'm not saying it has to explain everything at all. What I'm saying is it needs to create a sense of mystery, a sense of dread, a sense of this folk or cosmic horror, whatever you want to call it. But it never happens. It never happens. So this just comes out of nowhere and you're like, okay, that's kind of interesting, I guess. And maybe this is unique to the splatterpunk genre. I have no idea. All I know is from a storytelling manner, it did not make any sense. It just felt like it was there because he wanted it to be there. It didn't feel like the culmination of what the story was supposed to be. The very end of the book, though, I did enjoy because of its atmosphere, its creep factor. But as far as it feeling like all of this made sense, I just didn't get that whatsoever. So we have a disjointed character and we have a disjointed plot. Let's talk about the writing itself, or as I like to call it, the cinematography of the novel, to see if it's disjointed as well. And spoiler alert, yes it is. Overall, this novel is well written. There are plenty of great descriptions, there's plenty of great atmosphere, exactly what you'd want in a horror novel on the surface, the key word being the surface. The first problem I had with the writing in this novel is the fact that the writer himself was getting into the story far too much. So what does that mean? Well, this novel is told in limited third person, meaning you are in the perspective of the character, this being Laurie. You do switch over to Abby from time to time, and this further emphasized the fact that it was limited third because Triana does change the language when he is in the head of this disabled woman. But there are parts in this novel that felt more omniscient. They did not feel like they were from the perspective of Laurie. And at first I thought maybe it's purposeful. When you actually read the text, when you read how these scenes unfold, it did not feel purposeful. It did not feel like a camera pulling back or pushing forward or rising up. Typically what you'd see when something changes from limited third to omniscient. Let me give you an example. This is toward the end of the novel, and we are still in Laurie's POV. Don't worry, this isn't a spoiler, but she is approaching the door of a cabin. The key slid into the lock, old bodies in the act of love. The lock turned, sounding like a popping vertebra, and the door inched open, mucus peeling away from its frame. The board swelled with the stale air and breathed hot pus. That is clearly not through the eyes of Laurie. She has never been presented to us in such a way where she was that well versed with words. This happens numerous times also when she finds the key, which also leads me to believe that Triana was doing this for effect. He wanted to describe these scenes exactly how he wanted to describe them rather than through the limitations of the POV character. The second problem I have with the writing is exposition disguised as indirect monologue. Let me give you an example. This is during one of Laurie's flashbacks. She didn't know the answer to that, but knew it wasn't going to happen unless she made it happen. She was smart enough to understand nothing good came without hard work. Her grades, making friends, her summer job at the grocery store. If she wanted a boy in her life, she had to make sacrifices. She had to study if she were to figure out what they wanted, what a boy needs from a girl to make her special to them. And she would do these things, whatever they may be, even if she knew they were wrong. So what's wrong with that passage? Absolutely nothing is wrong with that passage. It's a very common technique called indirect monologue, meaning rather than the direct thoughts or direct interior monologue you'll see in novels with italicized text, this is an indirect method, meaning it is maintaining the voice of third person, but you are getting a direct look at the thoughts of the character. I would argue this is probably the most effective way to maintain the prose in such a way that it feels like it's from the POV character. The problem with the way it is done in this novel, it is absolutely everywhere. In fact, there are complete chapters written this way. So it feels more like exposition than you are actually looking inside the head of Laurie. And that is the failing. Normally in novels, this is interspersed with immediate action. So you'll see a scene unfolding before your eyes like a film, and then you'll have these moments of introspection. The POV character reflecting on something they're seeing, something they're experiencing, or what that experience makes them remember. But Triana abuses this technique over and over and over again. As I mentioned, entire chapters are written this way. And what does that mean? What does that mean? That means exposition. Why Triana didn't write these scenes in an immediate way, I have no idea, which is why I'm going to have to give Gone to See the Riverman by Kristopher Triana a 6 out of 10. A horror novel that had a great foundation, separate elements that unfortunately never fully connected, disjointed characterization, disjointed plot, and disjointed writing create an experience where once you get to the end of this book, you're just wondering what the hell happened. But on the plus side, I will say that it is at least a readable novel. On the surface. That is it for the review. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did read the book, stick around a little bit longer because I'm going to talk about my spoilery thoughts. But if you would like to check out my own works, my own novels, you can check the link in the description down below. Thanks for hanging out with me and thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. All right, this is the spoiler section. I repeat, the spoiler section. So if you do not want to be spoiled, if you have not read the book, stop now. Turn back. I'm going to assume you're gone by now. So let's talk about this book in a little bit more spoiler detail. And I'm probably going to repeat myself a little bit. Laurie, good old Laurie. She essentially raped her brother, drove him to suicide. She also tossed her sister off a cliff. Terrible, terrible things. And this is a lot of what people talked about in the reviews that I've read. But like I said in my review previously, it never connected to Laurie in the present. I was fully expecting, once I read this information, all of the actions Laurie has made so far, all the little things she's done, encounters she's had, conversations she's had, the weird little things that Triana should have planted ahead of time would have made sense. I would have been like, oh, that's why she was doing this. That's why she was acting in a weird way. That explains her strange little habit with this thing. So because of that, the character of Laurie felt completely thin to me. I felt like Triana didn't want to take the time to make these two threads connect. But maybe I missed something. If I am, let me know. I don't think I am because honestly, I just read Fight Club recently, which has a huge reveal of who the character really is. And you can see those breadcrumbs. They are screaming at you. Chuck Palahniuk knew exactly what he was doing. And so when you get to the end, when you see who this person really is, it all makes sense. Nothing really made sense in this book for how Laurie was. I mean, I guess on the surface, you could see, right? You could see why she was doing these terrible things, why maybe she was interested in this serial killer, right? It's because of her troubled past. Let's talk about the plot a little bit. It's really straightforward, and I thought there would have been more to it, but really it's crazy simple. She talks to Edmund, goes and grabs his key. Oh yeah, I should probably talk about that too. So This was another part of the novel where Triana's voice was rising up from the POV character when he was describing her digging through this rotting corpse in this cabin. Not only did he describe it in such a way that did not feel realistic from the perspective of Lori, but she did not react in any kind of disturbed way. You could argue, well, if you look at her past, she did some very terrible things, but guess what? She never did any terrible things relating to violence or dead bodies. I mean, hell, I would have been fine if there would have been a flashback of her messing with the corpse of an animal, like Dahmer style or something, but there was nothing like that. So it's kind of hard for me to connect the bad things she did in the past with her reactions in the present because they were born of jealousy. We know that she only pushed her sister Abby because she was jealous of the boy. She wanted to date this boy. And then what that did is bleed into her obsession with her brother. Because she was going through puberty, because she was boy crazy, she went for the closest thing she could. So all of this stuff was rooted in motivation, right? Regardless of if you agree with it or not, that's not the point. The point is she justified these actions in her mind, or at least her emotions drove her to those things. There was nothing she experienced that would lead me to believe that digging through a rotting corpse in a cabin in the middle of nowhere would have been no big deal. And yes, she did react a little bit, but not to my satisfaction, not in such a way where I would believe someone would react that way. And I think I talked about the writing enough in the spoiler-free part of this review. And you may say, well, hey, not all books require that kind of care. And I'd argue they do, because you could tell that Kristopher Triana was trying to tell a bigger story that went deeper than your conventional horror tale. We had this troubled woman who was obsessed with a serial killer. But Triana wanted to show her past. He wanted to show how twisted she was. And he used the flashback technique to reveal that. So I could see that he wanted to explore character. It wasn't merely some girl who gets in over her head because she's obsessed with true crime and she goes on this quest to fulfill this killer's desire. It had deeper roots than that, and Triana just did not, in my eyes, achieve that anyway. And that's why I said I can appreciate this novel for its disconnected pieces, but just all of those pieces never came together to solve that puzzle, to make everything make sense, to conclude in a satisfying way. Well, I think that's it for the spoiler section. If you decide to comment down below with spoilers, make sure to give a heading of spoilers in all caps and some space down below so people who have not read the novel aren't spoiled. Well, thanks for watching and thanks for hanging out with me, and I will see you in the next one.